All right, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first board meeting of the new school year. At this time, if everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, we will call our first hearing and privilege of the floor. If anyone wishes to address the board, please just step up to the microphone and give us your name and your address, please.
Chris O'Neill, 133 Sarcog Road, Glenville. Thank you to the district office people who fixed the situation with the daily email link to the weekly schedule. It's very convenient to be able to quickly pop into my email and check and see if I can catch a sporting event on the way home from work, or find out if the board event meeting is tonight or next Monday. On the other hand, for some more longer-term planning, such as travel possibilities for springtime, week-long or long weekend breaks, there's no substitute for the hard copy of the school calendar. 1 week into it, and I'm already missing it. I don't know if the calendar exists, because I haven't seen it yet. If it does, I'd like to know where to get it. If it's still on the way, I'll try to be patient. But if it's been canceled or discontinued, then I want to revisit that decision. So it usually comes in the mail, I thought, but I haven't seen it. So if there are copies, I'd like to get them.
We can do that, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah. They were slow coming, but this sounds really slow.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, at this time, we'll close the hearing and privilege of the floor, but remind everybody that we do have a second one towards the end of the meeting. So now to our special milestone event of the evening, where we recognize the teachers for tenure that they've earned. So tonight is a milestone for those individuals who have earned their tenure. Under New York State law, public school teachers must serve a probationary period of 4 years and 1 day from the date of their appointment to a position. During that period, they are evaluated, mentored, and coached as they hone their skills as an educator. School districts don't give people tenure. Teachers earn their tenure by developing their skills and abilities, and it is not an easy task. Congratulations to those who are honoring tonight, and at this time, would you stand up as we celebrate you, state your name and your area of tenure, and if you have any special guests with you, please let us know who they are.
Go ahead. Mr. Reynolds, why don't you start?
Sure. I'm Glenn Reynolds. I'm the German department. So I'm certified for 7 through 12, and I'm teaching pretty much 7 through 12, and including the foreign language exploratory, where I introduce them to all 3 possibilities. And I'm really, really honored to be part of the Scotia community. It's been a long journey, and I ended up in the right place.
Good,
So
thank you.
And one of my friends from high school is here today.
Welcome,
He
friend.
just happened to be up in the area, so he thought he'd come by.
Beautiful.
Great.
Awesome.
Welcome.
I have my husband and my daughter Kaya, and I am a teacher assistant in the skills development room here in the middle school.
I'm Erica Cohen.
Awesome. Okay.
I'm Nick Jones, and I'm the academic head for science and health. And I'm joined by my husband, Todd.
Awesome. Well, thank you and congratulations. Please join me in a round of applause for the tenure. And now, actually, at this time, we're going to take a quick break for cake and to celebrate your accomplishments. So it's served out in the back there.
So please.
Well, they're always,
Eat cake, as I can.
sometimes there's always cake. Did you say whiskey?
Thank you very much. It's football season. For City Hall, so. All right, well, thank you, everybody. So at this time, we will turn it over for our superintendent's comments.
And I will be brief because we have Dr. Hannes from Canfield Development here tonight to share Les Spring's work with you. But I do want to introduce, although I bet you know her, reintroduce Sarah Chaffee. Sarah was here, out west of the Great Plains, and she's doing her doctoral work at Sage, and she's going to study me.
Well, she's going to study us.
So welcome, Sarah. We're glad to have you. Sarah called and said, of course you can come here.
Yes, please.
All right. Hello, everybody. Happy
Hello.
Monday.
Happy Monday.
Good to see you again. It's been a minute. Just a reminder for the new folks in the crowd, my name is Dr. L.B. Hannes. You can just call me L.B. I'm the Clicker. A little bit about our methods, because there's a lot of ways to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work these days. We do something called a critical content analysis, is what we, from a methodological approach, I won't bore you too much, unless we have nerds in here. I'm looking at the doctoral student over there. We're looking for where in your organizational practice and policy and culture, trends and patterns around power and identity and inequity are located. Where are we finding themes? And we organize these themes into 3 big buckets, because diversity, equity, inclusion work can be everything and it can be nothing at the same time. So we really want to give it some shape. And so you'll see my data, and I'm happy to stay after and talk more about this. But you'll see our data is bucketed into 3 big buckets. Organizational structure. So what is the structure of the organization? What parts of the organization are in place that support diversity, equity, and inclusion or don't? What organizational processes, literally what policies and practices are in place that support or do not support diversity, equity, and inclusion? And then what's your organizational climate? We looked at things when it comes to climate around how folks felt about leadership, overall feelings of inclusion of the whole employee base, but also a particular look at what historically marginalized groups. So the historically marginalized groups we're going to talk about today are BIPOC. If you see the acronym BIPOC, that stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color, women, LGBTQ folks, folks with disabilities, and there's, I'll show you a much longer list. And so that's what we mean by historically marginalized groups. And then we have things where we look at team dynamics and connections to colleagues. So you'll see the data bucketed in these 3 big buckets. Here are our data types. We administered a survey. We created a survey with the Siena College Research Institute. It is a perception survey, and it was administered via email to all staff of the district. Everybody got an email, multiple emails actually. If they didn't take it right away, they got bothered several times over the course of several weeks to please take the survey. We had a pretty great response rate. 58% of your staff took this survey, which in the land of survey, that is a really great response rate. So kudos to the folks that helped with the communications and empower, encourage folks to take the staff, and kudos to all the staff that took it. We did a policy and practice review, like I said. We reviewed documents submitted by the district to assess written policy and practice around diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is everything from performance evaluation processes, hiring, onboarding, things like that. And then we also did qualitative data collection in the form of 12 facilitated focus groups that were open to everybody. And then we had some identity-specific groups. There were 63 participants across the staff. These were 1-hour sessions. We also did 8 individual inclusion interviews. These are one-on-one interviews. Everybody was welcome to participate for an interview. We also, many of the folks on the board here participated in interviews, so thanks ahead for participating. The thing I want you all to know is that we triangulate our data. What we mean by that is we look for themes that cross more than one data type. So if a theme only showed up in the climate survey but didn't show up in our focus groups or our interviews or our policy and practice review, it didn't always rise up to a major theme in the finding. If one person showed up to a focus group and shared one experience that wasn't shared by anybody else in the focus group or interviews, or we didn't see a similar experience coming through the data in the survey or the review, it didn't necessarily elevate to a theme. So we're looking for themes here for us to make some recommendations and some claims about what's going on within the district. All right, let's move off of the methodology piece. And this is what we're looking at. So I'm going to share first the climate survey, high-level climate survey data. I'll tell you that the report that we shared with the district leadership is pretty robust. It's over 100 pages long. That all of the data here tonight is not all of the data that we have. This is a high-level overview. Everything in this report is, we get pretty in the weeds to make sure that we're preparing you as best as possible for what your next steps will be, with or without our help. And so this is just a high level so that y'all get a flavor of what we found. in this assessment, you're going to see scores that are both positive and negative. Really, all y'all need to know, and this is just more methodology, is we're aiming for 100. You know, we're in a school setting. 100 is, you know, the high level is A plus. In all of our data, we're looking for 100, and that's our what we're aiming for. I'll tell you, no one that's ever taken this survey has ever gotten 100, so don't feel some way if your score is not close to that. Here is the score for the district on our climate survey was a 64. The average score of the folks that take our survey across types of organizations is about a 66, 67. So I know in the land of education, a 66 is like not a great score. But I want you to kind of break out of that mold of comparing it to the traditional, you know, ABCD grading out of 100 kind of mechanism. You're about average to how we see other clients within our portfolio. This score is broken down in two big themes. Your institutional score, it's measured by institutional structure. So what we mean by that is what policies, procedures, and structures are in place to support diversity, equity, inclusion. And then your institutional culture score. How does your organization, your company, your district, how does your district culture create a sense of belonging and individual authenticity for everyone? You'll see that it's not specific to any one group. This is overall, how is the district creating a sense of belonging and individual authenticity? So that's your institutional bucket. You'll see the institutional score is 60, your culture score is at a 65, and your structure score is at a 54. That breakdown of the culture being higher than the structure is very common in our participants that take this survey across sectors and across organizational size. The culture score, people's beliefs and knowing about how they feel about the organization is higher than what they know around policies and practices in place. When it comes to the personal score, we break it out in two kind of components. Personal beliefs. So at the individual employee level, how much does the individual employee's belief align with diversity, equity, and inclusion as a value at work? And then the personal practices, how often and how comfortable do individuals within the organization feel to take concrete steps towards practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion? Because we know DEI is both a value, but it's also a practice. And so that's what we were measuring, and I'm going to take you a little bit deeper here. I want to show you, those were your overall scores of everybody that took them, and then I'm going to break them down here by identity a little bit, knowing that you have some different ways to slice the data or splice the data. This top box here, and my clicker, my red dot here doesn't travel too far, but this top box here is binary racial identity. So given the smaller numbers of people of color that took the survey, we bucketed all people of color together to have a larger number to compare to white folks within the organization. You'll see the folks of color rate themselves higher when it comes to personal beliefs, institutional culture, and institutional structure within the district compared to their white peers. The green color means that the score is higher than the average. The red is that it's at or below the average overall score. So you see on the whole here that people of color rate the district higher than white folks, except for in the personal practice column here, where white folks rate themselves at a 63 and folks of color at a 61. So you can, some extrapolations from here is that, folks of color are less critical than white folks of the organization in its current form, or might be more critical or even less empowered around the personal practices. While their personal beliefs around diversity, equity, and inclusion are higher, their willingness or empowerment to take action that align with those beliefs is lower than white folks. And so some things to think about here and be curious about. If we take a look at gender identity here, we have binary gender identity. There were some folks in your data set that identified as transgender or gender nonconforming, but the number is too small for us to report on without compromising anonymity, so that's why you see the asterisks there. But there are folks within your staff that do identify outside the binary here. But when it comes to just a binary in terms of men and women, you'll see that when it comes to personal beliefs and practices, women score themselves higher than men. But if we flip that and we take a look about how women feel about the organization, they rate the organization on both culture and structure lower than men. So I just want you all to be curious. You know, we can have an in-depth conversation, but just curious around what's this bringing up for you, and thinking about if we're starting to pull this data out by demographics. We're seeing some differences, statistically significant enough differences in the numbers to make a claim that women feel stronger in their personal beliefs and practices around diversity, equity, inclusion than men, but men feel stronger about how the district is doing around diversity, equity, inclusion than women do. Here is the same scores, but by employment status in terms of tenure at the organization. Not tenure like we just like formal tenure, but the length of employment at the district. You'll see that folks that have less than a year have some of the strongest scores in terms of how they feel about the organization. It's higher than almost everybody else, except for in the place of personal beliefs. As we move, we see the kind of feelings about the organization and the beliefs around personal beliefs and practices increase as we chart into folks that have been for at least a year but less than 5, higher than average scores for that cohort of staff. And then as we move along here, you still have strong numbers when it comes to folks between 5 and 10, but then our scores in both the personal column and the institutional column start to dip, with folks 10 years to 15 having the lowest scores in terms of how they perceive the institutional structure, so how they perceive what the organization is doing policy and practice-wise around diversity, equity, inclusion. And then you see folks in the 20 or more years category having lower scores across the board, except for on par when it comes to personal practices. So again, we're seeing differences of perception and experience based on how long staff have been at the organization, with your younger tenured staff feeling more positively than folks that have been with the district for longer. Something to be curious about. Here is teachers only by work location. We see above average scores at Lincoln. We see, some mixed groups in terms of at Glendale, Glenwarden, and Sacandaga, but certainly as we move along these work locations, the perceptions and the experiences on both the personal side and the institutional side start to dip, with our lowest scores in all categories being at the high school. Just let y'all take in some of these numbers. Okay. The second kind of big bucket that I want to draw your attention to here is something called the tolerance thermometer. And so most of y'all in the room didn't take this survey, but what we did is we asked everybody in the organization, regardless of how they identified, to rate on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being threatening, and 10 being fully inclusive, and a 5 being kind of what we would call tolerant, how they would place these different groups of people within the district. You didn't have to identify in these groups of people to answer this question. And so you'll see that our top third and who your staff feel like the organization is most inclusive for are white folks, men, folks of high socioeconomic status, people in active and military veteran status, and women. That was kind of what, our top third or so. Our middle third, we start to see go down the line here, people with Christian, religious, spiritual identities, folks with disabilities, people with parental or caretaking responsibilities, and people of color, people of low socioeconomic status, kind of hitting our middle third. And then our bottom third, English as a learned language, people who don't identify as Christian, lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, or queer people who aren't U.S. citizens, and then trans folks coming out at the bottom here. You'll see that the T is often included with the LGBTQ, but we separated it out because it is a different experience. So what is important here, the numbers, the raw numbers here in terms of 9.4 versus 7.4 are less important to me than how folks are rating the groups in comparison to each other and who they feel is the most inclusive and who they feel like the district is the least inclusive for. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is, for the folks that aren't aware of like what standard deviation means in statistics, is the higher the number on this far right column means the more disagreement. So the lower the standard deviation means that most folks agreed around the score that they gave. So there's more agreement around this 9.54 for white folks, and there's the least amount of agreement around what the climate is like for, let's go all the way to the bottom, for trans folks at 2.69. So folks could have said, hey, it's really great for trans folks, and given it a 9, and then some folks could have given it a 2. There's a lot more disagreement when that standard deviation is higher. The other thing I'll have you think about, and this is in the report, but I didn't pull that slide up for you today, is we know that white folks are well represented in the district. We know men and women are well represented in the district. There are some categories in this thermometer that are not represented in the district. So folks are speaking from actual lived experience in a lot of these categories. And then there's a whole bunch of these categories that there isn't a critical mass of people to be saying this is actually true because I experience it for myself versus I'm going to guess what it's like for another group of people, if that makes sense. And that's something to pay attention to, is where do you have actual representation? And that's usually where you have the most agreement, because people have that shared experience and they can speak from experience versus perception of how somebody else might rate the environment. This slide right here is just another way to look at the data. Earlier I said, I want you to pay less attention to that 9.6 and try to make sense of like what is 9.6, because 9.6 out of 10 doesn't sound that bad, right? It doesn't sound that bad. It's kind of subjective, and I would have you think more along the lines of, now treat the lowest score as your new 0. The environment for trans folks is the least inclusive in your organization. That's what your staff is telling you. And then work your way up to say, you know, as we move up, your staff is saying that it is the least inclusive for this group of people and the most inclusive for this group of people. And then there's variation within between. So I want you to not get too fixated on the 7.8 or the 8.6 and more the relationship they are to each other and where your staff rated them. Next couple of slides, I'm going to walk you through some of the high-level qualitative data recommendations, and then we'll give you some time to ask me some questions. What's my clicker? Okay, so this is some of the qualitative data. A lot of words. We could share this out. Overall, staff have an appreciation for the efforts, but they're less confident about whether they're individually ready to challenge their own biases or if the organization is ready to challenge. There was an overwhelming, like, this is really good, we should be doing it, but there was less confidence around how to do it, or if they themselves as individuals or the organization is ready to actually do and make any kind of big change. There is a sentiment shared by employees that board members, y'all are motivated to be a greater source of support for students in pursuing organization-wide diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. When we're talking about the steepness of hierarchy, we have a hierarchy within any organization, right? There's power layers. The goal here is that while there certainly needs to be hierarchy for efficiency, how much do people feel it? Do they feel like, whoa, there's a lot of power dynamics here, and this person has a lot of power and this person has less power simply by where they sit in the organization. So employees share that the district has its own internal hierarchy and it's beholden to certain elements of local and state hierarchies. So as a school district, folks are like, yeah, we get it. There has to be these layers of hierarchy. 1/4 of focus group participants described the organizational structure as hierarchical or bureaucratic. I would dare to have any school district in the state say that they're not bureaucratic in some kind of way, because you are, extensions of the bureaucracy of the state. So that's not inherently necessarily like anything, specifically unique to y'all. But if folks are reflecting back, there's a lot of bureaucracy. That might be something we want to pay attention to. Majority of board interviewees echo the sentiment when describing the structure in terms of bureaucracy, workflow, and limitations of authority within the Board of Ed. Compositional diversity, not rocket science here, y'all. Relatively homogenous staff with 78% identifying as women, 95% identifying as straight, 90% as white, and 98% of you sharing that only English is spoken at home. So thinking about other forms of diversity. Focus group participants noted that employee racial demographics are predominantly white, Euro-American, and gender dynamics are usually comprised of women. When we asked around transparency and decision making, they shared that communication is an area of growth. I think something was brought up around emails are great, but other forms of communication's already come up today. So we're all learning how to best communicate in this day and age with what's available at our fingertips. In general, focus group participants shared a desire for improved transparency and input on decisions that impact them. They also shared they would like the opportunity to improve constructive communication skills across staff to help navigate conflict. What this means is there's going to be conflict within any organization. A big part of equity and inclusion is how do you navigate conflict effectively? Do they feel like when conflict comes up, is the district overly punitive or collaborative? Folks are sharing that they want to participate in being more collaborative, particularly in helping navigate conflict when it arises, and it will always arise. The goal here is not to pretend like we're going to get rid of conflict, but navigate conflict in a more generative kind of way. And then board members shared they felt transparency exists within their unit and their communications with the public. When it came to recruitment and hiring, focus group participants shared they would like increased structure, consistency, transparency, and accessibility and accountability when it comes to identifying bias and maximizing outcomes for hiring. This was also a finding in the processes around there's a lot of work that can be done around the recruitment and hiring process. Folks shared that there's an opportunity for the district to increase recruitment of BIPOC staff, so staff of color, and an elevated opportunity for improvement to new employee orientation and onboarding. Folks talked about retention as an issue, retaining staff, and in education overall. We know this is not unique to just this district, but retention and staff and burnout, particularly coming out of COVID, there's been a lot of stress on education professionals. And the folks share that the district is not currently providing the structures and supports to move hires from marginalized groups forward and upward in their career. So if we have a small cohort of staff of color or a small cohort of LGBT staff, how are we supporting them in ways that, while they might be small in number, how can we support them to be successful within the district? And participants are sharing that they want to see more of that. We talked about a process for accountability. Staff perceive the culture at the district to be conflict avoidant. Again, this is pretty common across a lot of our clients. And so thinking about how do we shift away from being conflict avoidant, not necessarily overly punitive again, but more thinking about it conflict generative. How do we address it? How are we accountable to it? And feeling like it is a productive engagement of addressing conflict as it comes. At this point, folks are perceiving that their DEI efforts are more aimed at being around compliance. In general, employees desire more accountability wholesale across the organization, and that a quarter of focus groups, at least one participant shared that they feel like favoritism exists. Again, perception can be reality, but that's a significant percentage of folks in focus groups that feel like favoritism exists. The thing I want to say about that, coming from, I grew up in Johnstown and growing up in a small town, we already shared, you have folks that are back here as staff. Favoritism can sometimes also feel like, there's that gray area of like being community-centric and wanting to, bring folks back to the community and having close connections across the community. And, there's lots of layers of connection here. It's just something to be mindful about. When does that tip into favoritism? When can it tip into favoritism? Without losing the strong sense of community and wanting to bring people back in and keep people and have folks move away and go to school and come back and participate in their community. We just want to make sure that it's not taking the place of credentials or opportunity or giving someone more opportunity just because of their connections. So that's important, knowing that, being a small district, that's a gray area that we want to explore a little bit more. Almost done here, y'all. Feelings of inclusion overall, so this is from all participants. Overall, employees shared that there was a sense of low morale at the time of their focus group discussion. This was in late fall, early January, February of last year, so we're coming out of another wave of COVID. There's also some union negotiations. We're in the middle of the school year, holiday time, lots of factors playing into low morale, but not excuses, but just reasons to take into consideration and be mindful of. During 3/4 of focus groups, at least one participant noted they had observed or experienced bias or discrimination while working at the district. And that was for overall. When we dug into some of the more historically marginalized groups, the groups I mentioned earlier, different populations are having different experiences at the district. That's clear in the survey data, and it was also clear through the focus group data, qualitative data that these identity groups shared with us. Women shared experiencing bullying or use the expression as a quote-unquote old boys club. We don't directly quote anything unless it comes verbatim from what our participants share, so that is y'all's language. There is a feeling of an old boys club to describe the culture, which is, is especially interesting considering how the number of women in leadership positions and the number of women across the district. So something to be curious about and think about, that just the presence of women doesn't erase a sense of this feeling of an old boys club, something to explore. And employees shared in focus groups that where employee representation exists, it has a has a positive impact on feelings of inclusion among employees with historically included identities. So what this means is places where there is representation, places where staff perceptions and participation and input is taken, folks, there's a positive return on that participation, and creating more opportunities for input has a big impact. All right. Okay, a couple more here. Inclusive leadership. Overall, focus group participants shared that the employee experience is dependent on school or building administrators. So you saw the difference of climate data based on work location at the teacher level. So it also came through in the focus group data. Diversity, equity, inclusion work in public schools has become highly politicized, and participants feel that. Right? We talked about, I think when I first came and shared the project with y'all, I noted that this work isn't inherently political, that is not partisan by nature, but it has been politicized. Y'all as the board know this to be true. And so it is something that has to be navigated. Your staff are experiencing the politicization of it, even at the classroom level, and it impacts their feelings and their confidence in being able to participate and take action, that personal beliefs and personal action piece. And so something to pay attention to, how are you modeling, how are you talking about that? Team dynamics and connections to colleagues. Staff express that their work is while it is high stress, it is also high reward. You have a really dedicated group of people in this district that care a lot about the kids and care a lot about all kids and creating an equitable and inclusive environment. But there's feelings of feeling siloed with many different kinds of microcultures, not only at the location level, but potentially by other kinds of silos and microcultures within. Staff perceive a resistance to change and suspect that diversity, equity, inclusion talk is just that. It might be just talk. Y'all are still in this process of gathering data and figuring out action. You're doing stuff daily in and out that supports this work. But thinking about what your next steps are, you're really going to want to pay attention to how are you showing and communicating the action. A lot of times it's really a communication endeavor to say, here's what you told us you wanted, here's what we're doing about it, and then doing a really good job communicating that. And then employees in more than 1/3 of focus groups elevated what was particularly relevant in the other staff groups, that positions with the least positional power or staff feel especially marginalized and unrecognized. So those within your organizational structure that have the least amount of power, the bus drivers, the TAs, the folks working in places that have little to no decision making, feel marginalized and unrecognized and unseen to some extent within the organization. So something to pay attention to. How are we making sure that the voices across all layers of the organization are seen and heard? So we mapped you on this model. This is a model that we use with all our staff and all of our clients, And this is big picture organizationally in terms of maturity as an organization. Now, there are components within your organization, individuals, maybe classrooms, maybe curricular things that are further along this model in terms of organizational evolution. But overall, we charted you at about compliant, because you're at this place where you're ready to be intentional and strategic around diversity, equity, inclusion, and apply that lens to all that you do. And so with, I'm going to talk about next steps in the project and recommendations, could move on some of these short-term recommendations that will move you closer and closer to strategic, and then strategic into more integrated. These are, I want to pop back just one slide. I think are you helping me over there? Can we go back one slide? My clicker keeps dying. Thank you. This is just some overview. This is a selection of recommendations. There is a lot more like I said, in the report. Develop and integrate a diversity, equity, inclusion commitment and vision, whether integrated or separate. Create strategic goals around diversity, equity, inclusion towards a strategic plan that centers diversity, equity, inclusion. Identify a senior staff person to help spearhead and guide the efforts. This is not the person that's only doing the work, but the person that's accountable for making sure the work moves along. Create an ombudsperson to support employees, aid in conflict resolution, and assist staff in voicing their concerns. And update and broaden your non-discrimination policy. And we give you some recommended language on how to do that. Okay, go ahead. Enhance your existing recruiting strategy to diversify your candidate pools, including tracking of demographics. What is important to an organization is what is measured. And if you're not measuring it, how do you know if you're improving? And so our recommendation for a lot of organizations is start measuring. Just build the infrastructure to measure as much as you can so you can hold yourself accountable to it. Think about developing a pipeline program. How do you mentor and support staff from underrepresented groups? Everything from folks of color and other kinds of underrepresented groups. And then provide clear expectation and training for hiring committees on how to prevent, mitigate, and navigate bias. Last slide here in terms of recommendation overview. Develop internal and external communication strategies that engage all employees and the larger community with the DEI work. Celebrate and elevate a wide variety of identities, particularly those mentioned in the report as feeling least included. Usually, a good rule is if you're elevating and centering the ones that are most marginalized within an organization, everyone benefits from it. There's nothing lost by celebrating more kinds of people. So take a look at your thermometer and say, who is our staff saying is the least included? Communicate more and validate more of that. Work your way through the list, and then naturally, folks are going to be more aware of and feel more seen by the district. And then this last recommendation here is enhance required training with DEI curriculum that includes learning and development sessions for all employees, particularly around the topics identified in the report, but also how do you build a culture of accountability to diversity, equity, inclusion work so that it's everybody's job at the staff level, at the community level, or at the student level. The full report has a lot more in there. The next thing I want to share with you is next steps. We are going to do part 2, which is, one, we're going to socialize this work, the same kind of presentation to staff throughout the rest of this month and next, so that everybody within the organization, the staff, get to see their input reflected back to them. And then we're going to turn our attention to assessing the community and students. And so there's a student survey that's going to run in October. Student focus groups, October through November. There will be parent and guardian focus groups in October and November, and then a community survey that is going to run October through November. So we've done the district level employees. We want to get everybody else's input. We will take all of that data, pull it all together for one big report, and come back and tell you what we found. And that is all I have. Happy to answer questions. Thank you for your help back there.
Helby, that's a great presentation. That's a great presentation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, the really awesome data, and I love the the hot spotting of where we're above average or below average. Who creates the standards? What is this? In order to get 100, where is that? Who kind of creates that? Where are those metrics kind of born?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Right now, well, this survey and the survey that we have is our tool, so it's not connected to a larger kind of body. And so the standards in terms of the numbers right now is created by us. What I will say around diversity, equity, inclusion work as a profession has really exploded in the last 5 years or so. And we're all figuring out what works as a community of practice, and what might work here might not work across the bridge in Schenectady, might not work up in Colony. There are some common promising practices that folks are using across sector, but and there's stuff coming out of the state. There's like the curriculum from developing culturally sustaining responsive environments. There's some stuff coming out of the state that's setting some expectations, but it's more art/science/humanities. And so what I have you think about in terms of these numbers is this is your benchmark. This is your benchmark data that you could compare to in a couple of years, do the work that you are currently doing and set more intentions and more strategies out there, and then come back and do a survey or a whole project in 3 to 5 years and say, okay, when we started this journey in 21, 22, our score was at a 64, and this is what our demographic profile is. How do we compare to ourselves from 3 years ago? Because it's really hard. Even if you have a similar demographics to another district, there's so many other things that could differentiate from even a district that quote unquote looks the same. So the standards are coming out of multiple places, and the score itself is really just an internal
Tangible
benchmark.
development.
Yes.
So, if you got 100 years saying, we respect and appreciate diversity, we are equal, and people here feel fully included, right? That's kind of like we did it. That's where you get to the 100 mark, right? And I wasn't asking if it's weighted at all, if we were compared to other districts that are similar, size and breakdown, I didn't know if that was, but if it's just everybody, industry-wide too, it's not sector-specific, I suppose.
Yeah, we don't, we are in a couple other school districts right now. We don't have a big, the comparison I shared is across all of our clients. In terms of school districts, we don't have enough of a data set to compare. Check with me in a year and I can answer that question. We talk a lot about weighting internally as well because, we comparing, for example, a district with your racial demographics, right? I think the racial demographics, it was like 90% white. The demographics and the weighting of the 90% white versus the 10% not white. Some statisticians could say, well, we could weight the folks of color by how much they're represented with the district and weight it in a different way, but we are limited by EO data and what data you collect. And so there's the whole world is changing around what data is mandated to collect, so we're limited a little bit around what you tell us your data is, what your demographics is versus what your staff tell us who they are. In the report, there's a full demographic profile from everything from race, gender, language spoken at home, religious identities, sexual orientation for folks that answered, household income. There's a really robust demographic profile that your EO data does not have. And so even if you just did that component in 3 years, you can compare and say, okay, our staff are telling us they're identifying as X, Y, Z, and that could be really good benchmarking data to compare against yourself.
So I believe the first slide said we had 58% respondents. Do you think that's like a solid statistical cohort or sample set to really represent the district?
100%.
50%?
Yeah, we could go, for it to be representative, and for us to make claims that we can say there's enough participation to be representative of the whole, we can go as low as 20%. So 58% is one of the higher response rates that we get through. Yeah.
And then last thing I'm going to go, I'm a project ambassador.
You are, yeah,
I
thank
absolutely
you.
love being part of it. In the policy review, I actually would love to be able to can we get a copy of the full report? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. In the policy review is the language of his or her, those kind of, the pronouns. Is that something that's identified, and our district's kind of moving away from that? And because
Yep.
we're working on a policy right now, it's important to.
100%. Bree, my colleague that she's presented before, is one of the best in terms of being very meticulous in policy review. And it's that the gender pronouns is very easy to control, find, replace. There's in the report, there is whatever documents you shared with us, there's policy level recommendations. So we say policy name, XYZ, this is what's great about it, here's how you can improve. And that one's an easy one. I go through and just take out the gender pronouns. There's a lot of short-term things that you could do without any of our help. And then there might be some bigger goals that are going to take 5 or 10 years. But there's plenty in there that y'all can turn over and do today. And that's one of them, yes.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the questions.
Have any questions?
No, so we get copies so I can download that in my brain.
And I'm going to invite you back, LB, to those questions.
Happy to. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
No, it's not a public meeting.
Okay. Thank you so much for supporting the project, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.
LB.
Thank you, Albie.
Next on our agenda is a presentation by our Director of Physical Education and Athletics, Jamie Rocco.
Good evening, Mr. Rockwell.
Evening. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to share with you the Scotia Glenville Physical Education Athletics team. It's kind of up there behind you guys. Sorry. You're welcome to look at it rather than me if you'd like. The thing started with a mission that was set up by Section 2, which is our athletic association, this past spring. When our executive director, Mr. Ed Dodd, brought it to the attention of all 90 athletic directors in the Capital District that we have a relationship with sportsmanship. This past spring, we saw a significant uptick in disqualifications across the Capital region. They stated that was the most that they had on record. So we challenged all the programs to do something about this, to try to remedy it. This summer, we got to work creating our theme that would incorporate our target athletic model and with a strong new focus on sportsmanship. So I'm going to do my best to describe it to you here. We want to center on the word sportsmanship, but in order to do that, we got to understand what that means. So we started off by thinking of the word live. Obviously, that's a word we use all the time. It means to exist, to be alive, but our point of emphasis here is we want to revisit that every day. What we do every day is going to define us. So that was the reason for the choice of that word. In is where it is that we want to live inside sportsmanship. We have 3 words that are going to help us with that notion of living in sportsmanship. The word sportsmanship is defined as understanding of commitment to fair play and ethical behavior. But if you put it another way, it's the knowledge to deal with things. It's a skill set. It can be developed and it can help learn our own character, meaning we can change our character. An athlete's character is often on display in very adverse conditions. So sportsmanship is a must. It can and should be taught, which is why we're making it our focus. In order to teach it, we feel we can use these 3 words that are circular, meaning they work with each other in collaboration with each other. And the more you do them, the more you can focus on sportsmanship. The first one that we put at the top is something we talk about all the time, integrity. Integrity can be defined like this. It's the quality of being honest. Our athletes are taught by our coaches to think about that idea. What do I do when no one's looking? That's what my integrity is, the person in the mirror. It's also having a strong moral principle. So what we do there is we try to teach what it is we want you to do, whether you're working on your skill set on your own or you're with us in practice. There's another way to define integrity. It's the state of being whole and undivided. If I use this room as an example, there is a structure, a beam that's going to go across there, and that beam has integrity. That beam is what holds everything together. So we see integrity not only as something that you do individually, but something that you do as a team. And when you can do that and you can be undivided, a byproduct is winning and being successful. Another way to look at integrity is having self-awareness. And when you have self-awareness, you do something uncompromising. You become authentic. You become human. You make a mistake. Your teammate makes a mistake. But what do you do after a mistake is made? That's where your integrity comes in. And when an athlete can really understand that integrity is that, it's okay to make that mistake. And it's okay for your teammate to make that mistake. Which takes us to our next word as it comes around the circle of inclusion. We just heard a lot about inclusion. We use inclusion every day in athletics, very similar definitions. We define inclusion as the practice of providing equal access to opportunities. So what our coaches are held accountable is to this. Every student athlete will get an equal opportunity. That doesn't mean equal playing time. It doesn't mean everybody's going to make the team if there has to be cuts. It means that every athlete has every opportunity. And then after they've made the team, our expectation is just like a classroom teacher, we're going to teach every athlete, not just the starters, but every athlete. So they'll have equal opportunity to learn what it is that our team is trying to do. Obviously, this is the idea of being part of a whole. So we use the inclusion also to include community members. Thanks so much for being here tonight, to include you in this project. Many of you are parents, so we want to include our parents. We want to include our opposing schools. When we ride up places, bus drivers are hard to come by, but it's not the fault of those driving us. We want to say thank you to those who drive us here. We want to wear our tartan crimson and white everywhere we go, and we want people to see that we're including them with our sportsmanship. So it's a really important thing that we understand that we want to include people. But spectators have to understand their role. We want you included. However, we don't want you to impede on the contests themselves. So this call for sportsmanship is also for our community to understand patience with our officials, with their opponents, and truly be a spectator. As you come around the circle, you hit the tartan, of course, and you come up the other side, and you got to have intensity. So we're athletes, so intensity is who we are. That's just how it goes. We want to use that intensity, though, when we talk about sportsmanship. Sportsmanship isn't just for the team that came in last. Sportsmanship is supposed to be the focus, and when you give sportsmanship intensity, again, winning becomes a byproduct. We look at 3 words when we're trying to find out if there's actual intensity involved, and I can't help but scan around and see some guys and gals who have coached and taught. So you know what I mean when I say the word effort? So we're asking our coaches to notice measurable effort from their athletes, measurable energy, and measurable enthusiasm. Many of us are parents. We know we give our children acts to do, but do they do it with the right attitude? Because if they're doing it with the wrong attitude, then we're usually not happy about it. We as coaches look the same way. We want to have the energy and the effort and that intensity, but we want to have it with the right attitude. There's a reason I'm rooting for my teammate. So we feel like intensity is what really brings it back to this idea that it's not just sportsmanship, like we're going to all cheer each other on, but we're going to be intense and compete. In Scotia, integrity is where we begin. We play anywhere, we play anytime, and we play to win. This is our motto. This is something that was here before we got here, and this is something that'll be here after we leave. It's an honor to play for Scotia Glenville, and we make no excuses about playing to win, but not at the expense of sportsmanship. In addition to our efforts, I'd like to share with you the Foothills Council and what they have planned. Foothills Council is where we compete. They're working on a one-day student leadership day on October 13th that will be done during school day hours. It's called Re-Engaging Sportsmanship. We'll be sending 10 of our student athletes to this. The target goal is that for that day, we are going to work on creating bylaws to address sportsmanship. So we'll be asking student athletes, coaches. We have a way of bringing in some parents to be as long as they're coaches. We want all our stakeholders to be at this day process to think about how can we, at least in the foothills, mandate that sportsmanship is something that's important to us. I would be happy to answer questions, but I don't want to forget one more thing that's part of this. Part of this idea of being super proud of being a tartan and having this motto is because of all the amazing things that this school has done in athletics competed over the years. And I just want to draw you guys' attention to October 7th and 8th is when we're going to be doing our Athletic Hall of Fame induction. This year's class of 2022 will get in that evening at the halftime of the football game, and then we put on a wonderful reception at the Turf Tavern the following morning. It's a little more of an intimate setting, but again, it ties into what I'm speaking about tonight because it's the essence of being a tartan, and these folks are very honored when they come back, and rightfully so. And you are all welcome to attend that. There are some extra, Susan, Mr. Schwartz can tell you how you get extra tickets if that's something you'd like to go to, meaning the brunch induction. Other than that, I appreciate your kind attention and be happy to answer any questions about our live-in sportsmanship model for this school year.
Okay. Thank you. Questions? No? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, appreciate it.
All right, at this time we'll move to our reports and updates. First time we've had this on our agenda in a while. So we'll go through, there might be any updates, there might be meetings, but that way we have them on our agenda and figure it out. We can talk about CASPO with no updates. Legislative liaison? Yes, sir.
Yes, we do have an opportunity to this week add or any comments to the board's, the upcoming conventions, slate of things that are going to be voted on. So we have an email that sent to all of us. If not, let me know. I can report it to you. We can review them and make any, collectively send any comments. That's the big thing. That's really the only legislative email.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wednesday at 6 o'clock in Lincoln Elementary is the first meeting. We'll be there. We're going to continue after that.
Good. Thank you. Our audit committee? I know we have a upcoming meeting on the 26th. 26th. Where's got that email?
It's going to be March 11th.
Thank you. Our Board of Education Policy Committee.
We met.
Yes.
We've already started. So Kim and I decided to tackle the 2,000 and 3,000 to start. And we made some notes and got together. Thanks for hosting us at the district office. We spent 2 hours together and really got through the 2,000. But it was great. Came out some great questions. And our plan is to finish the 2,000s, receive some comments back from Superintendent Swartz, and then tackle the 3,000s. And perhaps after those two, bring it to the larger group to make some suggestions. But but yeah, it's going forward nicely. Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's very interesting to see, some policies that haven't been touched since the 80s, and not that they all have to really, but it's good. It's kind of fun to go through them and kind of just, maybe notice where folks' heads were back in the 80s and where maybe things apply, nowadays. So I'm glad that the board decided that this is a strong effort, important effort to go forward with. Thanks.
Great.
Do you have anything to add? I'm sorry.
So I'm working with 27 pages of policies in 2000, so it took quite a while to get through that set of policies. 3,000 was just as big going down.
I appreciate you guys taking on that task. So
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Budget update, Drew, and we're early on here.
Right now, it should be on at the end of the month.
Beautiful.
Body of budget.
Beautiful, thank you. Then our board goals, I know we talked about those, keep working on those as a team, but obviously the policy. We're working on one already, and working on communication here with Bob's replacement, so we're working on that one as well. All right, thank you. As we move on, can I get a motion to approve item number 8, district-wide safety plan?
I'm with the Board of Education to adopt the district-wide safety plan for 2022-2023 as submitted.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kim. Any questions?
Were there any major changes? No. Any changes?
No, nothing of significance,
Yeah, I
and
agree.
that is our very broad,
The
only one we publish.
Safety plan over here.
which is why we tend to have a very high level view.
I was curious now.
I'm sorry, I had a low.
A high level view because we wouldn't be publishing our building level safety plans, for example. So this is our overarching meeting of the requirement, that's what I would say.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Or abstaining? So moved. Can I get a motion for item number 9, to approve the addendum between Town of Glenville, Scotia Glenville School District Resource Officer?
A motion to approve the addendum to the agreement by and between the town of Glenville and Scotia Glenville Central School District for District Resource Officer.
I'll second.
Thank you both. Any questions? Comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Or abstaining? So moved. Motion for the resolution, item number 10.
I move we adopt a resolution to accept an appropriate gift and donation from Friends of Music.
Thank you, Emily. Second.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Or abstaining? So moved. Can I get a motion for item number 11, please?
A motion to approve the memorandum of agreement by and between the Scotia Glenville Central School District and Scotia Glenville Teachers Association.
Thank you. A second.
Second.
Thank you, Pam. Questions?
I think Joyce is going to do a great job.
Absolutely. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Or abstaining? So moved. A motion for item number 12, request for an overnight trip.
A motion to approve the request for an overnight field trip, senior high school boys and girls cross-country team to the McQuaid Invitational at Genesee Valley Park, Rochester, New York, September 30th through October 1st, 2022.
Thank you, Kim. Second.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any questions?
What's the plan for chaperoning? I just noticed that both, I'm sorry, being honest with you, but boys and girls are both going to go, and I know the parents not that are being asked to drive, so we'll be there.
Those are parents, Mr. Pearl will be there. Peter, do we have other staff members that you're aware of for chaperoning?
I'm all for it. I'm just curious as to what the plan was for, just to make sure it wasn't, yeah.
That's a good question.
Thank you. All in favor?
One more
Oh,
question, I'm sorry.
Yes, okay.
So, it sounds like there's not enough money for a chartered bus for this. Like, is there maybe a good budget maybe in the future, how we can, or is it, since the parents are going away, let's just all drive together? Or is there a way we can actually get them a chartered bus in the future?
Well, certainly if Mr. Pearl was moving in that direction, we would entertain that. It's not, the entire track team mission out does not go. So it is students who have qualified for the invitation will meet. And typically it's not a huge crowd, it's people.
No, in past years, they do it was, they do a charter bus, but usually based on the amount that their future has in their projection. So the cost was significantly higher this year.
I can imagine gas prices on that, so, okay, just curious, I guess it'll be fair to charter bus one team, not the other, kind of, yes, that's all. Okay, thanks, Al.
Absolutely. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Or abstaining? So moved. Communications.
I'll move communications A through G, staffing line for 39, replacing the student facility as stated.
I'll second.
Questions?
Question, what is the, we said 39, right? I just about 33 for the arts and professionals to do as hourly as opposed to stipend. What was that conversation?
I think typically, Emily, it's because different people do different events. So depending on who's working, there's a flat rate. And then they'll submit a timesheet for the hours that they work to get supplemental payment. Somewhat like being a chaperone. Don't get points chaperones.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Or abstaining? Thank you. So moved.
Can I just comment that we are one of the few districts in the area that's actually filled all of our TA positions. Many schools are really struggling to fill those, so we should be really happy.
Thank you for that.
And I wanted to respond to the question that Pam had asked me about the school psychologist position. So one of the school psychs who's at Glen Warden is also the person who fills the counseling position at Glen Warden, Pam. That's why, but you can't, they're not appointed to two different tenure areas. So all of our schools are covered. Good, thank you. You're welcome.
All right. Let's see. Routine business or displacement of children with disabilities. At this time, we'll open up the second hearing and privilege of the floor. If anyone would like to address the board, please just say your name and your address.
Hi, I'm Caleb Serene of 209 Swan Street, and I would just like to say that me, on behalf of the wrestling team, would like to say that we were going on in our community outreach and looking for money to raise for wrestling mats and singlets, and we got a bunch of checks, and I didn't know what to do with them, so I thought the best place to do was bring them here with our letterhead and give them to you guys and see if any way we can get more funding from the school to help do that as well.
That would be Mr. J. Quinto.
Lucas Crowder, 978 Ridge Road. All of you have met me. This is actually my last week interning for Drew in the business office. I just want to thank everybody for welcoming me here and we stayed in these last 5 months, 6 months since February when the board meeting. So just want to thank you. And I think all the wonderful job. But I'm gonna keep coming. You know, my internship's over. I am 2 minutes away, and I like to know what's going on. So thank you again to everybody, to Drew and to Susan for facilitating my internship virtually anyway. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm sure it feels good to have that part behind you.
Steve's going to have a couple questions. Back to the question I was going to ask, but I think I don't know if you guys actually find the answer. She said 58% what the doctor answered. She said 50% was an okay number. What that question was, she said, correct me if I'm wrong, 90% of our administrative staff is right, correct, and 10% is marginalized. So she's not a good enough number, 50%, but what about if the 10% marginalized was the 10% that didn't respond to the survey? I understand what she's saying, that 58% is a good number, but if we're split, if it was 50-50, black pocket, white, and I think I'm saying this properly, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, then you'd have an acceptable number. But we have such a high white, if that 10% didn't respond at all, well, then you really can't say that the data to me is in a fair spot. Not that I'm not complaining about the data itself. I'm just saying I didn't understand how you can have a 58 a good number and not knowing what responsive you reported. I hope I'm saying what I'm thinking in my head. I know you're looking at me. How am I saying it?
I understand what you're saying.
You did want to go into that?
Yeah, we'll get that, Susan will get that information, we'll get back to you.
Okay. Second question is that I hear you're having a legislative meeting with the Board of Education with the state.
So, there's a convention.
Correct.
Yep.
Can we bring up, and I know I talked to some of you off the record, I don't know how you want to say it, not at one of these formal functions, how do we bring up homeschooling? And as far as extracurricular activities such as drama club and other various activities. I have a lot of friends in the community that have children homeschooling. I don't know everybody here, I'm sure Kim knows people, and Rick knows people, Hal knows people, and they homeschool. And it's not just athletes. I mean, they miss being able to do musical instruments and being part of the school system. And I understand that most of it is insurance related in New York State. Why you couldn't have them on? Because they're not a student of the school, insurance would come to be on school property. But that should be an easy fix with a rider or something else, or a waiver signed off by the parent. Waiving any, I'm not a lawyer, no I was, but there should be an easy waiver to waive any accidents or I don't know the legal property behind that, but it would be, I think that'd be great for the district to be able to work on. I mean, we have some tremendous kids in the community that are homeschooled that I run across, and I know you do target football, I know you do target lacrosse, that are tremendous kids and they're homeschooled, and they're almost giving up with their sports at a 4th grade level or a 5th grade level, knowing that there's nowhere for them to go. I mean, you can't do football after 6th grade, I don't think.
Correct.
Basketball, you can go, there's leagues and stuff, but there's nothing for that. So one more thing, and I promise I'll be done with you guys. So Caleb's also raising, one of the reasons he was raising those maps, those are the same maps from when I went to high school here, and I graduated in 97. It's not just is it old and tacky, we go to other schools, and our maps look horrible. We don't have a logo on there. We actually put them down. Has anybody here been to a wrestling match? I mean, they put them down. Scotia does with tape. We tape down the center of the mats and then extend it 4 feet on either side. So if you go in a small gym, like we've done this year, but up until this year, all you saw was the dirt lines and constant stickiness and everything else from the mats because we have to use packing tape to hold our mats down. Which, not to mention being a tripping hazard, it just seems like, I hate to say it, but it's like we're better than this. Like, we can be better than this. The community will reach out and they will help. Caleb and a couple of his teammates did that in one day. Not a lot of money, but that was one day a couple kids. And they brought a couple in their box. And it's the same thing they're fighting with the singlets that they use. I mean, there has to be a health thing with them that are, they're 15, 16 years old. I mean, they don't say Scotia on them. We don't have, you don't even look, we want to talk about being part of a team. Nobody matches each other. You have a few that they've replaced over the years, some that are old, some that are 2 parts, some that are long, and nothing's right. So I just wanted that to maybe be addressed more. And hope you guys can look at that. I don't know. Safety concerns, I don't know if there is anything with the mats. Everybody's going to be a different type of mat now, so I don't know. That would be something to just ask the rest of the coaches. I don't know if there's a safety concern, like if there's a rule with football or anything. But that's it, if you guys could
We'll get
look at all of that.
Yeah, we'll look into those and address it. Get back to you. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you. At this time, we'll close the hearing and privilege of the floor.